Hello, everyone. I'm Gabriel. I'm the lead developer behind Stone Story. I think for most everyone here, it's the first time hearing my voice, even though I did some streaming on Twitch very early, maybe 2 years ago or so. Um, I wanted to start by thanking everybody who tested the game in the beta. Thanks so much. All the bugs and feedback super valuable. Um, it's very motivating. Even when something's already known, it's already a known issue. It's really great to have verification and more information on the same issue, and sort of helps piece together. Sometimes on a more complicated problem, I can piece together all the information from everybody and figure it out. And we've had some bugs that were really old that we figured out, right? So that was great. That was very awesome. The game's in really good shape now. It's very stable. There's still a couple of problems, but I'll get to that. So thanks, everybody.
All right, cool. So
And yeah, with me is
yes.
like the rogue
Yes,
is.
okay.
Sorry, I was going to introduce you. Like the rogue is helping with the some of the marketing bits. Do you have some questions for me to start off?
Yeah, okay. I guess we're just jumping right into this. Yes. So as Gabriel said, I am Kyle, or like the Rogue, and I have been helping out the past couple of weeks with the marketing and PR push, and I thought it would be a really good idea to talk to Gabriel about the development process behind Stone Story, just because it's such a unique game and a unique approach to games in general. That I thought there would be a lot of cool stuff to find out from picking his brain a little. So thank you everybody for coming, and yeah, seeing the magic that has gone on behind Stone Story. So I think to at least start off with, when I was looking into the history of Stone Story and your background on it, one of the interviews you did, you had spoken how you had discovered ASCII art around 2013, which is pretty late in terms of like just thinking of like how old ASCII art is.
Yeah,
Had you
ASCII
not
art
really cared about
is
it
pretty
before
old.
then, or was there
Well,
something in particular that sparked that interest in you?
sure, I can talk about that. There was definitely in the early and mid 90s a lot of development in ASCII art. Prior to that, ASCII was used as more of a user interface, right? In early DOS and terminal applications and stuff like that, ASCII was important, and you had MUDs and text-based adventures and stuff like that that did use ASCII a little bit, a lot of the times for just representation of data, representation of game state. And I was familiar with ASCII art, but when I saw Candy Box in 2013, that's when I realized that it wasn't just representation of data. It was an art form, right? It was a
Mm-hmm.
medium, and it stuck out to me as something that um, maybe there's more to it. So I checked the credits behind Candy Box, and the names of some of the artists were there. So I looked them up online, and there were these huge archives of stuff that they had done over the years.
Hmm.
So I started looking at a bunch of those, and what I really realized was that ASCII art felt abandoned as an art form. And I guess because in the 90s you could finally send pictures and video over the internet,
Mm.
and that transitioned, and games were still around that time chasing photorealism. Pixel art as a semi mainstream thing didn't exist, right? Pixel art back then was a hardware limitation, right? So this whole idea of retro didn't even exist yet, and so ASCII art felt abandoned, as you could see it being developed from around that time, and there were lots of really great artists. So I wanted to pick up on that, and in 2013, I was just studying it as a hobby, and I was emulating some of the styles from some of the artists that I liked, and that's how I started. I didn't really have the game as an idea
Hmm.
in the beginning. I was just studying the art form, and I was always into animation. I studied animation when I was younger. When I was 12 years old, I did an animation course, and that stuck to me. You know, I really liked it. I find the process of making animation a lot of fun. For most people, I think it would be tedious, but
Yeah.
for me, it's fun.
Yeah, well, I guess one of the things that I'm wondering with just ASCII as an art form, I think I've seen you comment on it elsewhere, but you've said that it's more or less, it's even in some cases like easier than pixel art animation. And what would you say makes it easier?
Well, it's certainly different,
Hmm.
but it's more similar than most people would think because the animation process is the same. You search for reference material, so you're looking for pictures or other animations that other people have done, characters, like you're searching for inspiration, and then you're doing basic keyframe poses and you're trying to figure out the exact size of the character that's going to fit into that location, right? So this process is the same across all media, and then the animation, frame by frame, you're calculating the length of each animation and how many frames you're going to need, and then you copy paste in this case it's text, so you copy paste the frames and you modify them to tween between the keyframes and get the motion that you want. Um, it can be easier than ASCII art, than pixel art, because ASCII covers more space on the screen.
Hmm.
If you're doing a high if you're doing a high pixel
Right.
quality animation, it takes a lot of effort on the animator. Like, um, if you see the process of some of the pixel artists working, you can tell it's hours to do one, like one arm swing
Right.
is like an hour of or more of work, right? To do like one motion. Um, it depends on the resolution. So I
Hmm.
would say that there's more variance in pixel art. There's more resolution variance. You can do low res pixel art or higher res, and you get more effort. But
Hmm.
in ASCII art, um, there's less resolution variance. So I would say it's more flat.
Hmm. Yeah, and Ray actually brings up a good game, and it's like something like Street Fighter. Those heavy, not only like heavy animations, but heavy color. So I assume working in black and white makes it a little easier for you when you only have to really worry about the shapes for the most part.
Um, Sort of. I think it's just a limitation of the tools. I do need to make better tools and that would enable color to come online. When I need to do something in color to give depth, it's a lot more work. It's sort of like twice the work because I have to break it into layers and stuff like that. Yeah. Which Street Fighter were you thinking? Because Street Fighter 3 is pixel art, right?
Yeah, I think
Is it
up until 4, so all of the spin-offs
4?
like Alpha, Street Fighter
Oh, 4
Zero.
is 3D.
Yeah. So
I'm
all
pretty
of the
sure.
games all the way up
Yeah.
to that were pretty high definition pixel art.
A big
Um,
inspiration for me is Darkstalkers. They have really beautiful
hmm.
animated pixel art, very organic. It's sort of you can see that in Stone Story. In some of the bosses is very morphing and organic, right?
Hmm.
That comes from Darkstalkers.
Really interesting.
Yeah,
I have to try and see if I can pinpoint the I guess similar approaches then. Um, but going back to Stone Story, so in another interview, talking about like early on in the process when you were still figuring out what the game was, you said how the game was initially going to be a roguelite, but that didn't really mesh with the idle controls or the bot controls that you wanted to include in the game. So I was curious what specific details about that scope caused the project to shift into more of an action
yeah.
title.
The well, I wouldn't say it's an action title right now, but
Hmm.
definitely at one point I did want to make it more of a roguelike early on, and it didn't work because roguelikes only really work if you have enough room to make mistakes.
Hmm.
You need to have enough choice for your choice to make mistake for your choice space to have mistakes at which point you lose. Right? That's the only way in which roguelikes work.
Hmm.
Um, and Stone Story does play that way if you're trying to go for a speed run, right? If you're trying to like clear the game in an hour, let's say, you can't make any mistakes. And then it plays a lot more like a roguelike if you try to do that. I've tried that a few times. I do enjoy the roguelike genre. And I do think that in the future, there might be a game mode that goes back. I think once we have enough mechanical complexity with some of the unique items that I'm planning, we can definitely do that later. But
Oh,
it
really?
wasn't working. Yeah, in the tests that I did, it wasn't working because the combat mechanics early on were very shallow. Right, you had a shield, you had a sword, uh, you had a crossbow. Right, like what are your choices? There's an AI that controls your character, so you're not really moving around to make mistakes that way. So really, it was like, is this level a crossbow level or is this level a sword level? And
Right,
then
right.
it was boring.
Hmm.
It didn't fit. One of the things about roguelikes, for them to really work, I feel like you need to kill the main character very quickly. You need to kill the player on the first level or something like that. But they can't feel like it was the game's fault. They have to feel like it was their fault. Like you made a mistake that got you killed.
Hmm.
And I wasn't able to transmit that feeling.
Hmm. Yeah. So
Does
with
that make
Stone
sense?
Story's gameplay, it is and one of the defining features, is its AI. So it does feel a little more on the relaxed side.
Yeah.
And it does kind of promote the player to take things at I would say leisurely pace, which yeah, if you're talking about getting putting the player in a situation where they have to, I guess, experience death and get killed very early on in the game, that doesn't, I can imagine how that wouldn't exactly mesh particularly well with the idle controls.
Yeah, it doesn't. You need a lot more choice. You need more gear,
Hmm.
essentially. So I feel like, look, you played the main mode, you play the story mode, right? And you learn about all the mechanics, you learn about the crafting, you learn about how armor works and the different elements and stuff like that. And then I can add a roguelike mode that throws a
Ah,
lot more complexity at you, like gives you a lot more gear to start out with.
huh.
And maybe you even start with all the soul stones right off the bat, or they come very quickly and randomly.
Ooh.
Uh, Plus all the unique items thrown on top. Then you have choice, like you only have 2 equipment slots, right? So for this specific encounter, you see it, you pause. Okay, there's a skeleton and maybe I mix the enemies together from different levels, right? So like a skeleton plus a scarab, right, from different levels, and then you have to figure out, okay, which items should I equip here where I won't take any damage, right? So that's your goal. You're trying to like minimize damage. I think it can work really well.
Sorry, I had to get out a little text announcement.
Sure.
Yes. So just a clarification, we are still totally taking questions, and I'll get them in after in a moment here. But yes, please feel.
Well, Mac Meowcern did ask about Hans. All right, that was one of the questions. Maybe I could answer that.
Oh
So,
yes, possibly
mhm.
explaining who Hans is and the role he has.
Yeah, let's talk about him. So, Hans has a really interesting backstory that I'll admit that I'm still developing it, but I've got some stuff figured out that's not in the game yet. And one thing to keep in mind about the shop in the game, the shop was added to solve a very specific problem that the game had in the progression. So the problem was that it goes back to the amount of choice, right? You didn't have enough choice, and as you're going into a location that's more difficult, like the mushroom forest is sort of like a difficulty spike from where you're coming before that, and the shop was a way to make up for people's mistakes. So if you're not using the right items, you can just buy your way, you know, with the soft currency. You can accumulate some chi and buy the gear that you need to progress. So it solves that problem really well. But then people felt like the shop felt really empty. Where's the shopkeeper, like who's taking care of the shop? So I came up with Hans, and people really like him. It was a lot of fun to make the design for the character. It's inspired a little bit by um, what's that game called? Uh, Grim Fandango. Yeah, it's this old adventure game. It's got this sort of slender character design that I really liked. And the thing about Hans is that, okay, he solves the problem. We also had another problem, is that people weren't understanding the depth of the crafting. So a lot of people were just combining the same item to make like a better sword or a better shield, and they didn't understand that you could combine sword with shield to make a hammer or etc. Right? There's a crafting tree with dozens of items. So the Hans solved multiple problems at the same time. Now he has a bigger role, right? So for example, enchantments are something that people don't necessarily understand at first. Like you get one enchantment or two and you're not really sure how they work. Hans has more roles to play, right? So with enchantments, maybe he comes in on day 2, so the shop restocks. So this is my current idea. The shop restocks on day 2. You come in, and he has a promotion. He's got a green item. It's a +4 at the shop, and you gotta buy it. It's 1,000 chi. So you gotta, okay, I've got a goal. I've got 24 hours to accumulate 1,000 chi to buy the green item, and then he explains to you about enchantments, right? This is sort of the nature of the game, where you're learning as you go. He serves sort of as a helper to explain some of the more complex topics with the crafting booklet as the first example of that. And then later, he has more roles to play in the story as a whole, because he's a very unique character in the world. There's nobody like Hans in the world. He is invisible, and he can teleport. So, yes. So he's a very powerful individual, and he has other shops. That's not his only shop. He has a shop in the Icy Ridge that people can't access right now. It's not complete. He also had a shop in the Haunted Crypt, but I took it out. It was going to be a potion and wand shop, but I redesigned how the potions works, and then it just didn't make sense anymore. So I cut out but it's a shame because it looks really good. The entrance for the shop, like similar to how the Mushroom House looks really cool.
Mm-hmm.
The Haunted Crypt shop looks really cool too. It's a shame, but sometimes you have to cut things.
You gotta find an excuse to put it in somewhere.
Maybe. So there's the ice shop, and in that one he sells scarves. And I'm still working on the design for that. The scarves aren't 100% ready, but as soon as they are, the Icy Ridge shop's coming online. So that's one of the post-release features. There's a lot to do still on the game.
Cool. So while we are on the topic of scarves, though, Nick Miarison does have a question about are scarves just visual?
I've thought about it, and so that's part of the question that's still open, right? Are they just a visual thing? Maybe maybe they're just a cool factor, and that would be an interesting dimension to explore in the game, because everything adds mechanics, right? So the scarves don't have to add mechanics, but they could. I don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll figure it out. We'll work on that. I'll definitely be talking about that in the chat once they come online and we have some animations and stuff. Because we want to do hats, right? Everybody's like, oh, add some hats.
Cosmetics, you gotta have them.
hats don't really work in this game. I've tested. I could do some hats, but I didn't feel right. I think the scarf is the right slot to
Mm-hmm.
add. So anyway, let's move around. Let's move along.
Yeah.
More
So.
about Hans. One last thing about Hans. So um, he has this ability to teleport to anywhere in the world. So he serves as this connection um, between the different cities and different regions of the world that so he's a very valuable character for everybody, right? So he has a bigger role to play in the story.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get back to him as we expand the world more in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very
Cool.
nice to hear because playing through, yeah, Lootmeister Hans definitely did stick out to me as one of the very few funny characters and endearing characters, really, because the game does have a great sense of humor with a lot of the descriptions and enemy names, but Hans is really one of the few NPCs that you get to interact with. Um, yeah, and he definitely sticks out. So he's very much looking forward to more content with him. But yeah, so there was one question from Dungeon Robot, who asks, "What are your thoughts on a boss rush mode?"
um, I had never thought about that before. um, that's a good idea. So how would you explain to me, Kyle, how would you explain a boss rush? Well, like, what are the important
Hmm.
parts?
So a boss rush mode typically, so for example, one of the series that is the biggest implementers of a boss rush mode is Mega Man. So typically, Mega Man, the basic setup is that there are 8 robot masters or bosses that you need to fight through. You get their abilities, and you move through the game. But at the very last stage, typically what will happen is that there is a boss rush or a gauntlet where you have to fight all 8 of them again in
Oh.
succession. And
Hmm.
typically, what happens then is, yeah, it's the same fights as before. Sometimes there might be some variations on the mechanics to make it a little more challenging, but really this time around you're just coming back in, and this time you're a lot more powerful.
In
um,
Mega Man, do you still choose the order
yes,
for
you
the
can
boss
still choose
rush?
the order that you fight the
Hmm.
bosses in.
Okay.
So for something like Stone Story, it would basically possibly look like something where you're going through all the bosses again, maybe in between, like getting a consumable of your choice or something like that. But it's essentially a gauntlet that you have to go through after you've already progressed through the game and progressed your character.
Yeah, that's something we can do. It could maybe be the could be related to the roguelike mode. I guess the correct answer here would be to design those modes and then pick which one makes sense to do first, because
Hmm.
you can't do all of them.
Hmm.
It would have to be a choice between those.
Right, right.
Um,
Well,
Potentially, the boss rush is easier to implement,
yeah, because really
but
it's
it
just putting
depends what
the
people want.
right, right.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
more of a fan of the roguelike mode
hmm.
personally,
Hmm.
so I would be inclined to do that first. But it's a good question. We can talk about it more in the future
Well,
when we get to that.
that is now on the table. So thank you very much,
Yep.
Dungeon Robot, for bringing that to standards attention there. But Carl does have a question here, and this is something that I was
Hmm.
personally interested in. But Carl asks that there's a question about boss names like Nagaraja and Hrimnir that are drawn from mythologies. Are there any other bosses with hidden meanings in their names?
Well, D'Angelo's his name is just direct etymology. It means um, the bearer of bad news, right?
Really? Oh.
He's the deliver. He's the bad news guy, right? He takes bad messages essentially. Like,
Hmm.
that's what his
Hmm.
name means.
Hmm.
And then Zelo Algus means wood of pain or pain wood or something like that. When you say it in English, it doesn't sound that great, but I mean that's what he is. He's the wood of pain.
Hmm. Hmm.
He's in constant pain, and that's reflected in his exterior and how he talks to you as well. Because he's all the negative parts of Luce. When Luce broke into two, her positive aspects stayed in Acropolis and she transformed into a white tree, and then her bad stuff poured down and transformed into Zelo Alvis.
Yeah,
Um,
that's one of the
let's
cool things about Stone Story is that if you want it, there is quite a good depth of lore behind everything.
So what other bosses are there?
Well, Ray
Well,
did bring up.
Balesh. Uh,
Balesh.
Balesh is just Shelab backwards.
Oh my god, I did not. If, you know what? I need to type that out right now. Oh my god!
So
Wow, that's actually kind of blowing my mind right now.
I figured somebody would realize that, but nobody did.
Wow. Okay, that's actually pretty cool.
I think that's all the bosses, right? Are there any
Oh, and
more?
then there's Moral and Inoki.
Yeah, those were just from the Discord. So we did a session where people suggested a bunch of names for those two mushrooms, and then
Mm-hmm.
those were the names that were funny and actually combined. So it's like Morel the no, it's Morel the sporadic, and then Inaki the fun guy to be with, and those names were a combination of the different suggestions that people gave, and that was really cool. So that was sort of a crowdsourced names.
It's cool because it definitely, yeah, the a fun kind of name definitely fits for that boss fight because they're very bouncy and kind of goofy.
Yeah, yep. I try to make their personalities really different. They're sort of yeah. So that's sort of like the same idea as Loose. The angry mushroom split in half, and then half of his personality went one way, and the other half went the other way. So it's part of this. I guess it's a repeating theme.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Maybe the
Uh,
player will split in two at some point.
mhm,
Spoiler.
yeah, no, that may or may not happen. There is no reassurance on that. But maybe again, while we're still sticking on bosses, Nick Narrison was wondering, what was your favorite boss in the game? I guess just either as like a concept or in how you designed them.
My favorite boss. Let's see. I really do like Nagaraja a
Mm-hmm.
lot. It's the most. I think Nagaraja me, reflects my personality as an artist the
Okay.
most.
Hmm.
It's the most organic. Um, Mushrooms as well. So I think those are my favorite. Yeah. The Bronze
Mm-hmm.
Guardian has something about it, like the simplicity of the Bronze Guardian, the simplicity of the design is what's really cool to me. It's big, but it's minimalistic at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, so that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
And when the helmet pops off, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It really came together.
I would say that's probably yeah, it's probably my favorite boss fight. Just because the the whole like the flow of the fight and the patterns, it's a lot of fun. Especially once the hammer goes down and then like, oh, all right, I gotta drop all my DPS now. It was a very fun boss fight to go through. But
Yeah,
yeah.
people like Palos. I mean, I like Palos too. And
Mhm.
the arm animation. I'll be honest, when I made that one, I had no idea what I was doing. Like
Excuse
Paula's
me.
attack was one of the first things I did in
Really?
the project. Yeah, very early on.
Hmm.
So I did the spider, and the first spider was terrible. I redid the spider at one point. Um, I did the spider, and then I did Palos, and then I just made it as I went along. Like I had no
Hmm.
idea how long the attack was going to be, the animation was going to be, if the arm was going to fall off. Like I had none of that was planned. I had no idea how long it was going to take me to make because I didn't have the experience. I think I made Palace in 2015,
And
something
is
like
the
that.
final iteration of that boss fight with all the animations and the attack patterns, has it changed significantly?
Well, I redid his face and I redid his neck a little bit. It hasn't changed fundamentally.
Hmm.
I polished it a little bit, but I was just I feel like maybe I just got lucky with that one. It just turned out really good, because you can see like when he's about to swing, he changes his mind and then twists his arm around and then swings again. Like I was just spitballing there. I didn't know what I was doing with
Hmm.
that one, and it worked. So I feel like there was some luck involved with that one, and it fit the screen perfectly too. Like
Hmm.
on some monitors, on some resolutions, he gets clipped one row. His head clips at the top, so it wasn't perfectly planned,
Hmm. But
but
it
it worked
worked
out
out just
great.
fine. Worked out just
Yeah,
fine.
which is
Um,
also why I hadn't done his third phase, right? So Talos has a final phase of the fight that isn't in yet, where it's just his head and his spine.
ooh. All right.
And now I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna do, yeah, I'm gonna make that one really nice.
Cool. All right, something to look forward to with that. But that's honestly like one of the things that was really cool to me going in is really just the boss fights, and how unexpectedly tense they are. Especially with with the core gameplay of all right, you're not controlling this character, you're pretty much focusing on the larger strategies, but those boss fights still feel intense. So what I was wondering with the design of Stone Story is that um, it takes a lot of cues out of incremental design, and those kinds of games are better known as idle or clicker games. But those are
Mhm.
traditionally thought of as mindless Skinner boxes. So, in your own words, like what defines an incremental game, and how have you transposed those mechanics into Stone Story?
One thing that really struck me when I saw Cookie Clicker um, was how fundamental it was in terms of gameplay, how basic, and it's really great to see deconstructions of gameplay like that. I was really taken back by Cookie Clicker from a game design point of view,
Hmm.
and mechanics like that exist in all sorts of games, but oftentimes they're not purposeful. So when I think of incremental design, um, lots of games have incremental design. Any game, most games have a level progression, or different locations you're exploring and they get harder.
Hmm.
That's incremental game design. But to call a game incremental, like this is an incremental game, it means that that's a core mechanic,
Hmm.
right? That it's intentional. I feel like incremental design is sometimes just something that happens naturally, like you're just making a game and then you base it on your experience as a gamer, and other games have done this, so I'll do it too, right? And it works. Each level getting harder, it makes sense. Um, when you do it meticulously, like with equations and stuff like that, it's a completely different experience. And that's what games like Cookie Clicker do.
Hmm.
They really take it closer to a science than an art, um, in terms of game design. Now, how does that get to Stone Story? Well, the mechanics. So in incremental games, often it's a single mechanic that scales, right? And I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to do more mechanics that are layered on top of each other so that their complexity can multiply. And they do scale. So you have the anvil, for example, is an incremental system. You start with just a sword and you combine those together and you can make bigger
Hmm.
swords, but then you get shields and then you can combine swords with shields, and then later you get enchantments and you get runestones. So the other systems that are coming in are creating new dimensions for the incremental system, right? And
Hmm.
then they're all uh, individually there's several incremental systems, and then they crisscross, and that's how I envisioned
Hmm.
the game. But I also fundamentally I wanted to add that I take ideas from the Mario series. There's this Nintendo design philosophy called Kisho Tenketsu. It relates to level design and how you structure it, and that is also a fundamental part of the Stone Story design, is how mechanics are introduced, then developed, and then they combine together. And I do that so that I don't need a tutorial system,
Hmm.
right? I introduce the mechanics one at a time in an incremental way, and I use some of the Kisho Tenketsu philosophies to teach you how to use them
Hmm. Hmm.
without having to explicitly teach you. So
Right.
those are the two pieces of the philosophy.
Yeah. So that's actually really interesting that you're talking about, how you're teaching these mechanics, right? And you're introducing them, one at a time so the player gets used to them.
Mm-hmm.
So in my talks with you, it's been very abundantly clear that learning and teaching are incredibly important tools in game design. So what was the hardest question that you had to make sure players understood how to answer?
I think there were really two things that were really, really important to the fundamentals of the game. And the first is that you don't control the main character. Uh, that's a really hard barrier to climb over because most games teach you that you do control the main character. And then I'm trying to make a game where you don't, and it always confuses everybody. So I had to structure. I must have spent a year just redoing the first three levels and those first few progress bar quests in the very beginning,
Hmm.
and how I structure the very first like 10 minutes of the game. I redid it over and over to get a better percentage of players, and I think I got close to 100% now. Um, it really took until 2017 to really get the beginning of the game in a way that people understood that they don't control the main character.
Hmm.
It took a lot of work um, to undo that teaching, right, that other games have taught you.
Hmm.
And then the second thing is the anvil. Crafting items is incredibly important to the retention and the fun of the game, the engagement. So I needed to make sure that you understood that you need to combine two swords to make a better sword. Like, so the first levels are crafted very carefully in a way that you're not able to progress unless you use the anvil correctly, and then you're introduced a few more pieces for that equation until eventually you start integrating everything together. So the anvil was the second part that I really took a lot of work to get right, and the game had torches. Oftentimes people ask, oh, why don't you add a torch? And there are torch animations. People see them and like, where are the torches? Well, I took the torches out because they were working against the anvil, right? They were like this other weapon branch
Hmm.
that didn't work with the crafting system,
Hmm.
and so I had to cut the torches, sadly, because it took a lot of work to get the torches to look good.
Wow. A necessary sacrifice,
Yes, I
sounds
think
like.
so.
Yeah.
But the
So,
torch is coming back as a
hmm.
unique item. There will be one torch in the game, and
Ah,
it's a unique item.
well, there you
It's the frost torch.
go. Cool. Well, another thing to add to the list of things to look forward to, but it's one of the things that strikes me, especially with the crafting, because yeah, like you said, it takes a bit. There's a bit of a learning curve, but once you figure out how it works, everything just makes sense because there is a definite logic to how everything works. But a large part of that, and large part of like learning the mechanics, right, is the UI and the UX. And with Stone
Mm-hmm.
Story,
Yeah.
it's fantastically minimalistic. So, how did you decide what was enough information to give the player?
Well, I always start with the minimum necessary, and that already gives you a uh, pretty good idea. One of the advantages of ASCII art is that when you're doing UI design, you can just open Notepad and start typing the screen, right? You don't need to code anything. You start drawing the screen essentially,
Hmm.
and you get a very close approximation to uh, the final screen, right? So when I'm designing the inventory and I'm trying to figure out where things go, I've got a text file and I'm moving things around, and when it feels right to me, then I put it in front of players and observe how, how they do it, how they interact, and based on that feedback, make changes.
Mm-hmm.
Just one system at a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that UI too, one of the things that I was wondering is how much of, I guess, just with the UI, the UX, and just the gameplay philosophy in general, how much would you say of that stems from your time in mobile gaming? Because I know that you spent quite a bit of time working on different mobile apps in that gaming market.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I learned so much. I learned everything in my time making mobile games
Mm-hmm.
about people, about user interaction. Um, I would say I owe everything to to my time in Finland, where I learned to make mobile games.
Mm-hmm.
Up froze my ass in Helsinki and learned to make games.
Wow. And
Uh,
here you are now making your own game, and
yep.
it's shaping up to be very very nice. But yeah, this has been a very interesting deep dive into the process behind it. So if anybody else did have any
Did
questions
we miss any questions?
to ask Gabriel while we're here,
I
oh,
do have some points.
there were
Did you have something?
a couple questions. It looks like Rural
Okay.
Spaceman Ray did answer with a quick yep. But Rural Spaceman was wondering if there were any ideas for multiplayer modes and what that might look like.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I had ideas for multiplayer modes, but I've decided to not do it. It's just not worth the effort. Like, if you think about the amount of time it takes to add a multiplayer mode to this game, it's like you might as well start a new game. Seriously. And then, yeah, I wanted to do a stable with pets, and it would be sort of like a Pokemon game, and then sort of like a secondary game mode, and you would be able to
Hmm.
fight other players with your best pet essentially, and then you could have like a pet spider, a pet uh, whatever, the different monsters in the world.
Hmm.
You could catch them essentially. So I did some mock-ups for that, and that was a fun idea. It would still work. I still believe that would work, but
Hmm.
it just deviates from what the game actually wants to be.
Right, right.
It wants to be, a single player RPG, and I think the interaction between players is more cooperative in terms of figuring out how the systems work, how to optimize against certain bosses, how to optimize your stone
Right.
scripts. People can always collaborate through Discord or something.
Hmm.
And I think that's a pretty cool way to make it multiplayer. Is just create features that create like community engagement.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I've been very impressed with the just amount of time that has gone into theory crafting. For all of the beta testers, there are a couple channels where people can talk and share their builds, and it ever since Gabriel released like the most recent update, it's just kind of just been a non-stop stream of theory crafting, which is really cool to see. But it does show that that there is that very high potential for player collaboration, which is not traditional multiplayer like you said, but it still does require people to engage with each other.
Okay, so Mac Meowson asked what's my favorite dessert,
Oh
and
yes,
that would be chocolate cake for sure.
very simple but very delicious.
I'll take a chocolate bar as well, anything with chocolate,
Hmm.
but chocolate cake when it's well made.
Hmm.
Modability. So Rules Spaceman asks about modding.
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of modding. Honestly, I would love the game to be more moddable. It's just not set up to be moddable, and yeah, it's a smaller to make it moddable is definitely a smaller project than let's say adding a multiplayer mode. maybe it's something that will happen later. If somebody else comes and hacks it and makes it moddable, I'm okay with that too. I'm not opposed to people modding it. Very soon there will be some aspects of modding built into StoneScript, and that's coming in on release. On release, that'll already be in. But it's very minor. It's like for fun, you know. You can do little drawings on the screen and do expressions and make the characters say things, and those were some ideas people gave, and yeah, that's low hanging fruit. That's stuff I can add. That's pretty easy.
It'll be small details that I'm sure players would appreciate. But in addition to other small details, Beagle Gaming is wondering, will the game have a cheat mode?
No, there will be no cheat mode. If people do cheat, they can. I won't be mad if people cheat. I'm okay with that. I think that's all right.
Well, don't do it, but if you do it, it's okay.
If you do it, I won't be angry. I'm all right.
So, unless there were any more questions coming from people here, I think. Oh, what do you do? Oh,
Something about pirates. No, there's no. Well, I don't think there's any pirates in the Dark World now.
I don't think Beagle meant pirates in the game. I think he meant pirates of the game.
Hey, if it happens, it happens. Yes, there are plans for a bestiary. Yes, that's a recurring question, and it's on my list. It's just we'll get there. I could talk about features that are sort of at the top right now.
Okay.
So StoneScript is an area that, because it's so easy to add more stuff to StoneScript and it creates so much value for the players, that's an area that I want to invest more time on before release and after release too. Variables are going to be added to the language as a big feature, and that should allow a lot of new strategies. And then there are more items. So I know some people in the beta completed their crafting booklets, but there is more. There is the bardiche, the heavy hammer, and a bunch of shields that are going to be added, at least 3 shields. And there's more. So we've talked about the whip. The whip might be added as a base item. And when that happens, there's going to be a whole tree of stuff that you can do with the whip. At least three things that you can make with the whip.
Sword whip.
Yeah, so you mix the sword with the whip. What does that do, right? Or the shield with the whip, So I have to answer those questions. Huh?
Could you tell us what a shield and a whip would make?
Maybe a flail or a morning star or something like that. I think the whip, the whip tree is about semi-ranged weapons or ranged weapons that break armor. Because right now the only weapon that breaks armor is the hammer, which is a melee weapon. So you move into ranged stuff that is anti-armor. That's what the whip would do.
And Meowerson is wondering, would the whip have knockback, or would the defining feature be the armor penetration?
Yeah, that would be the defining feature. It'd be like armor penetration. Maybe some knockback, but knockback is one of those variables that's really easy to tune after the fact, and you just have to test it to see.
Yeah, because there are already a few items and abilities that add some sort of stun or knockback. So
I just added knockback to the ice items. So the ice wands and the ice crossbow have a pushback of 2 right now, as of the last build. The next big feature on the list is the fairy. So the ferry is a big feature that is going to be added to the game right after launch. And it's sort of 1/3 implemented already, maybe half implemented already. It brings a lot to the table. So the ferry is sort of your third item slot. It's your accessory slot where you can put a soul stone or a rune stone or a talisman, something small on the
Oh.
ferry, or a ring or something.
Hmm.
And she follows you around, she attacks, or if it's a passive item, it gives you the passive bonus, so it doesn't take up one of the hand slots, which are more valuable.
Hmm.
And then the fairy does more than that. So the fairy is going to help you in your workstation tasks as well, and you can send her to collect resources. So if you send the fairy off to gather wood, and you go fight in the caves of fear, then the fairy's not following you, right? She's not helping you in combat because she's gathering wood. So you have that choice of using her for resource gathering. She's a very important feature for speed running, especially because you can do lots of different strategies
Hmm.
to speed up your progress with the fairy.
Now the question is, will she talk?
She has a few dialogue lines, but doesn't talk that much.
Okay.
No.
Because I think Carl here is expecting a certain line to show up.
No, I'm not going to use that. No.
Well, if somebody wants to mod that, that is up to them. But
Yeah, you could potentially do that. One thing that I really like about the fairy is I'm proud of the wing
mhm.
flappy animation that I was able to get in 3 cells, like 3 by 1. I was able to get the fairy animation the way I wanted, the way I imagined, and I was very happy about that.
Mhm. So it looks good. Well, that's good.
Yeah, that was a
Um,
tough one.
yeah. So McNarrison is wondering if there is currently or plans for a new game plus mode.
Sort of. There's more, right? There's expansions to the world. Uh, there's other areas. There's water levels. There's Acropolis. It's a big world, so there will just be more stuff, but not a like start over sort of feature.
Hmm.
The only start over feature is the speed run. That is sort of a new game plus. I mean, you don't have to speed run it. I guess you could play it slow if you want to.
People play it how they want to play, but yes, it's a good. Yeah, it's and I've actually heard you talk about that quite a bit before. Was speedrunning something that you had planned for from the beginning, or is that something that came up as you were developing?
Yeah, as I was developing, I started to play the game that way. I was like, at
Hmm.
one point, I was thinking, how quickly can I beat the game? And so, because I'm a fan of speedrunning personally, I do some speedruns,
Hmm.
and I wanted to add that for a long time. So that'll come as well. The quest stone is another item that is incomplete right now, so that'll be a big feature.
Hmm.
And then finally, the last big feature is the bosses and the cyan difficulty. So right now in the game, you get the 5 stars, the 5 white stars, and then you get the 5 cyan stars, and then it unlocks the yellow ones after that, and then the green ones, and then the blue ones, and then the red ones. Um, and we'll get to those right post launch.
Huh.
They're just going to get harder and harder, and they'll introduce new mechanics and new boss patterns and stuff like that. So a lot of work will go into those.
That is a lot more incremental than I thought they were going to be. I did not expect at least like 4 or 5 more difficulty levels or stages.
Yeah, I don't want to add just one more area, right? Neat is asking if I am going to add another area. I don't want to add just one area. Um, when I add new levels, it's going to be a big pack of them, like 3 at least, 3 or 4.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a big world expansion. I'm thinking 3 or 4 areas. Depends how it goes.
Mm.
We'll get to that.
Oh,
There's
but
going to be at least one underwater one, um, and then Acropolis. Acropolis itself is sort of like a whole other world. It's a big, big city, and it's got a lot of stuff. And
mhm.
I've already designed part of it.
Yeah, I've been wondering what that's been looking or is going to look like, just because Acropolis is a place that gets mentioned so much in the game. So it's like you can't not have that in there. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it's an important part of the world. So there's the Stream of the Silent, and some people might have seen it. It's this vertical river that goes up into the sky, and that's I don't want to spoil too much, but that's an important feature of the world, and and this is why so many people have gathered around this area.
Hmm. It looks like Miarison is wondering, will we ever be able to flood the world with light?
That's a good question. Um, maybe. I'm not sure yet. We'll get there.
Maybe,
Yeah, maybe.
maybe. Okay, cool. So, unless there were any more questions from people here in the chat, give it a few seconds for anybody to ask questions they might have. I can see several people typing, so give it a moment here.
Okay. Last chance to ask.
Oh, that's not a question, but a thank you. Oh, Foradal for Radel, Zombie Pirate Man is asking a very important question. What is your favorite type of shoes?
Ah, nice. Well, I would say Pumas are my favorite. I have 3 Pumas. One's red, one is green, and one is blue. So RGB. And then I can match them with any
There
clothes.
you go. Fashion advice
So
with standard combo.
yeah, I have 3 Pumas.
Yeah.
I guess that's my favorite. They're super comfortable and they're cheap. It's sort of a miracle how cheap they are.
Oh man, I might need to get some Pumas then.
And then I have a couple of other pairs, like more social looking ones.
Cool. All right, cool. So I think just to this is probably I guess a good question to end on. But Beagle Gaming is why did you decide to make an ASCII game? Now I know we talked about like what attracted you about the aesthetic and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
but when did you
Yeah,
make that
this is an
decision to
interesting
commit?
story. Definitely, I've thought about that, and in 2000, I've mentioned this before, maybe in another talk, but in 2013, in 2014, I had this bigger project. It was like a space rails shooter called Perseus 230, and it was going good. I had a team, a few people, and we did a Kickstarter, and the Kickstarter failed. And it was around the time when Kickstarter started to get really challenging to pull off around that time, and we were not able to reach our funding goal, and the team got really demotivated. I wanted to keep working on the game, but it was too big of a project, and I needed something that I could do by myself. So I reached into my design folder of ideas, and ASCII art RPG was in there, and I had done some character concepts and some screen concepts, and I picked that one up and developed it and decided that was a good one. I could do that one. I've always wanted to. There's another tidbit about this story is when I was younger and learning to make games, I wanted to clone Diablo because I was a big fan of the first Diablo, and I quickly realized how hard that was, and that I could not do that by myself. uh, but then, fast forward I guess 20 years or so, and now I know what it takes to make a Western RPG by myself. So that's Stone Story.
Well, here you are, 5 years later, very close to release.
Yep. It's
Cool.
been
So
fun.
yeah, so I think that is probably a good place to end the Q&A part. Were there any last things that you want to cover?
Um, Someone did ask if I did the music as well, and the answer to that is no. When I meant I make it by myself, is that I mean without audio, you can still make a game. It's not a great game, but I can carry the project, right? And I did pair up with Raphael, who's been doing a great job on all the audio, and then we were recently joined by Arthur, who has been doing the sound effects
Mhm.
lately, and they're almost done with the audio. So I did work for 2 years by myself, I think, on the game, and then I got help for the audio, which I'm not very good at.
But it's all coming together. I guess there are more questions from people here. So I guess just a quick answer to this is like, what is the breakdown of time taken for everything? Like,
I would say that most of the time goes into the programming. There's always so many problems, and the systems, when they overlap with each other, they create lots of bugs, and that takes that's an infinite task. Like a new system, like StoneScript, for example, takes only 2 days to get up and running, but when it intersects with the rest of the game, that's when the real cost of adding that feature reveals itself, and you don't really know what that's going to be until it finally happens.
mhm.
It's definitely the programming probably takes about half of the project, and then there's a lot of business and marketing stuff that takes a small slice out of the time, like planning for events and doing taxes and stuff like that. And then there's the fun stuff, the design and the animations uh, are maybe a third.
So it's a lot of busy work. A lot of busy work.
Yeah. Well, the programming needs to get done somehow,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Boss fights, I guess, take the most time in terms of features, like concepting, animating, integrating the audio, and programming the boss fights like one boss probably takes twice as much work as the entire location. Like if you split the location into 3 chunks of time, it's like 2 chunks for the boss and then one for the rest.
Hmm. Oh, I guess we do have people are still streaming in more questions, but Neat is wondering, yeah, with like so much of the time devoted to just getting things working, like how do you motivate yourself to continue through the boring work or just the work that needs to be done?
Yeah, that's not an easy thing to do. I guess for anybody, the what I always say is just do a little bit every day. Just make sure every day you do something, and the boring tasks, they have deadlines, so they bubble to the top, and you gotta deal with them at some point. So make sure you keep a list. That's what I do. I keep a list of all my tasks. I break them down. I put dates on them, and I shuffle them around. And the boring stuff at some point needs to get done. And sometimes I get penalized for missing those, but I end up taking care of everything. So as long as you're doing a little bit every day, everything gets done at some point, and that's how I get through that stuff.
Yeah, it really is just the hardest part of like making things part of a routine.
Yeah,
It's not really I would say, at least in my own experience, it's not really motivation. It's more about the discipline of continuing, like you
yeah,
said,
I hear
making
that
those
too.
tasks.
I didn't realize that it was discipline when I started doing it,
Well, got you to where you needed to
but I
be.
guess it is.
Hmm. Hmm.
So Carl's asking if I have hobbies. I guess lately I have not had time for any hobbies because I've been working nonstop
Mm-hmm.
since October. I have a studio that I work at that I've been helping to grow. It's called Manticore Games, and we started it 2 years ago, and now we're up to I think 35 people now. So it's growing really fast, and between that and Stone Story, I just don't have any more time.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say that either. So both are full time jobs essentially right now. So I have two full time jobs, and um, if I did have time for a hobby, I would probably play card games professionally. I would play Dominion and Hearthstone.
Well, hopefully you'll get time for those after after the project is done and like you have free time.
I don't know, man. I have so many ideas for games, for cool that I want
Mm-hmm.
to make that I don't know if I'll ever.
Ever play video games
Well,
again?
yeah. Well, I am playing a little bit of Diablo right now for
Oh, okay.
resurch,
Okay.
but
Let's see. That's
Diablo
easier.
3, right? So I played Diablo 1, I played Diablo 2, and now I'm finally picking up Diablo 3, like
Hmm.
12 years after it launched.
And your thoughts on it? Just very like brief thoughts on it.
I think they've done a great job. It's a really good game.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel a little dated in terms of how it's structured, but maybe they've made assumptions about the player base that you come into the game already knowing
Mm-hmm.
what you're supposed to do, and that's fine for a franchise. That's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think unless there are more questions streaming in, because it seems like people have been popping them in a bit afterwards. All right, I think I see a couple people typing.
Well, when I say I work nonstop, I mean I do stop to sleep. Like people ask me, "Do you sleep?" And the answer is yes. I sleep a lot, actually. Like, yeah, I don't have a problem sleeping.
Now you speak of wondering very cheekily, why did we make this interview?
Well, Kyle wanted more information about the for the marketing, right? You wanted more info,
Mm-hmm.
and we were talking about that. And then we do these weekly chats, just the two of us, and we figured, hey, let's open it up to the rest of the server.
It's fun. That's it.
Yeah.
But I mean, realistically, I yes, Gabriel and I were talking, and Gabriel's got an amazing game dev history and like a lot of experience that it really is just kind of a rabbit hole digging into just his brain and how he approaches game design and how he views games, his own game and just other like the market and gaming in general. So I thought it would be pretty cool to have other people here on the server just take a little peek at that as well. But
Yeah, I'm always up to, I can always give an opinion about anything. It might not be the best opinion, but
all right, then I guess last question here. Somebody asked Standard for his opinion on anything. Go.
yeah, there's one last question about non Stone Story related.
Well, there,
Oh,
neat
I've
got in
already
first.
answered that.
Ah,
No,
yeah, that's
I
true.
already answered that. I think clicker games are great because they get at the basis of what games are.
I don't think Beagle's question is an actual question, but McMeowerson does have a question about what is your very very open. What is your favorite image ever?
Favorite image? That's hard.
That can be a
'Cause
painting
there's so
or a
many
meme.
images.
Right, right. Or gifs. There you go.
That's that's hard. Um, I don't know. I don't think I have a favorite image.
It's an image of chocolate cake.
Yeah, that would be nice. I'll take that.
There we go. You got your answer, McNarson. All right. So I think yeah, that about pretty much wraps it up for all the questions that I had, and I think people had. Were there any
All
last
right.
things you
Well,
wanted to cover?
you guys can ask stuff in the general or direct message me, and I'll answer then through text. All right.
All right, cool. I think that about does it. Thank you very much, everybody, for stopping by and hearing Gabriel such standard combo talk. And thank you very much, Gabriel, for taking the time to do this.
Yeah. The last thing I will say is that you're doing a really great job
Oh no,
on the
this is happening in public. Oh, all right. Well, thank you
Yeah.
very much. I appreciate that. No, I saw that. I saw that edit, Yarson. I saw him remember me at the last second. All right, I'll take it. Anyways, thank you very much, guys, for stopping around and listening in.
Yep. Nice chat. See ya.
All right, see y'all later.